final chapter of McClay's book, Land of Hope, deals with the world after the Cold War. What type of America do we live in today? McClay says something very, very interesting at the beginning of his assessment of the world since the Cold War. He tells us something very honest about being a human being and being a historian at the same time. You want to look at the world, you want to look at history with a fair and objective eye. You want to have a fair and objective perspective. But McClay says that the closer history is to when you're writing about it, the more likely your passions, the more likely the things that you believe in will get in the way from you giving an accurate account of what's taking place. So how's he going to deal with that issue? He's going to do something, I think, a little bit like the great French thinker. He's going to say, my point is not to be partisan left or right, but to look further than the parties, to look further than the political persuasions. And that becomes hard, but it can become overcome if you work correctly. So what's he tell us about the Cold War? He tells us the most important thing after the Cold War is that we had a hard time finding a structural principle that organized history. So here what he's suggesting is that during the Cold War, we knew who the good guys were, the United States, and we knew who the bad guys were, the Soviet Union. And as a society, we thought about ourselves as being good and the USSR as being bad. We thought about capitalism as being good and communism as being bad. But what do we do after the fall of the Soviet Empire? What type of principle holds us together? What gives us a sense of patriotism? Well, here two ideas spring forward. One, that perhaps we can lead the world and create a new world order throughout the world. But then the second is perhaps this is a time for retrenchment. We can go back and we can tend to our own business. We can work on American society. Here we have been for 100 years, been fighting wars throughout the world. Perhaps now is a time to focus on ourselves. So here there's on one hand a desire to take our universal principles and to spread them broad, and on the other hand to kind of regroup and to think about what our particular sentiments are. Which direction do we take? Well, a lot of the things that take place after the Cold War in many ways define the direction we take place. So it's the event that takes place that encourages us to look at our world and to look at our orientation to it differently. So here, for example, he talks about Operation Desert Storm. We're led by the elder George Bush. The United States turns back Saddam Hussein and Iraq after its invasion of Kuwait. A second important historical moment post-Cold War, 9/11. Once again, the Middle East is brought into picture, brought into focus, and the question becomes, are we to punish those who have flown planes into our buildings, or can we defeat terrorism? Ought we to want to defeat terrorism throughout the world? So is it a question of taking care of our own society and rebuffing the aggressor, or is it a question of taking our universal principle of liberty and democracy and spreading it abroad? Now, there's going to be an argument within American society, McClay argues, between those who advocate one of these two ways. And that argument leads to a great dysfunction in American society in the 1990s and the 2000s, even though this period is marked by great economic prosperity. The one thing that McClay sees is that the divide between Americans continues to grow as we lack this central defining principle, which is where he leaves off his history. The greatest challenge that American society faces in the 21st century, McClay argues, is a challenge of whether or not it's going to be able to overcome its divide. And he says something here at the end where we cannot have a patriotism that is overly individualistic. We cannot have a patriotism that's based upon a blood and soil tribalism, nor can we have a patriotism that's based upon a globalist dream. We need to realize and try to figure out a way how to balance our love of our particular self and the love of our universal ideals that we would want shared with other people. To the degree that American society will be successful in the 21st century, it will have to do with this blending of particular and universal ideals.